To the Carolina Weather Group. This is the Wednesday, December 6th, 2017 edition of the Carolina Weather Group. Tonight we're going to be talking about Hurricane Harvey and kind of the before and during Harvey and then the after effects of Harvey. We have a great group of guests with us tonight. We have Tom Johnston. He is the meteorologist in charge at the National Weather Service in Corpus Christi, Texas. We also have Lance Wood on. He's the Science and Operations Officer at the National Weather Service in Houston, Texas. And joining us again this week is Ashley Morris, who lives in the Williamson County area of Texas. So we have a lot of Texans on with us tonight. So hopefully if you are joining us tonight from Texas, welcome to the Carolina Weather Group. This is a live podcast / broadcast. We are streaming on multiple outlets, Periscope, Facebook Live, YouTube Live, or you are hearing us on the podcast restream. That'll probably be up tomorrow. And if you have any questions during the show, please feel free to reach out to us. You can do that many different ways. You can comment on either stream, Periscope or Facebook Live, or you can tweet us a question at Carolina WX Group, or leave us a comment on our Facebook page or our YouTube page, and we will look at those throughout the show as well. And if you're listening on the podcast and you have a question for our guest, later on we'll let them share their social media accounts. That way you can reach out to them. So it is an action-packed show, and we want to get started with that. I do want to say before yesterday, December the 5th, was our 4th year of existence. So Ricky and I started this thing 4 years ago, and we're still here, Ricky. They haven't kicked us off the airwaves yet. So
the funny thing is, didn't we start it because of a snowstorm?
We did. It was a snow and ice storm, and that's what we're talking about again. Funny, isn't it?
We'll get to that, I guess, in a little bit. But yeah, excited to have 4 years now, Scotty, and hoping for 4 more years, I guess, that were longer. Outlasting some other stuff. But anyway, a lot to talk about tonight with Harvey. I guess I'll just jump right into it here. Lance and Tom, so happy to have you join us tonight. Obviously, we're glad things have calmed down a lot at your offices now, too. For just some background information, we'll let Tom go first. Give us a little bit of information about your primary role at the office and how long you've been there.
Yeah, I've been here at the National Weather Service in Corpus Christi for about 3.5 years now. I'm the meteorologist in charge, so just responsible for making sure everything runs well, that we continue to put out excellent forecasts and warnings, and just deal with day-to-day operations. So it's been quite a ride. Got to deal with both Tropical Storm Bill and now, of course, Hurricane Harvey. So a little bit of tropical experience there, certainly in my time.
All right. And Lance, what's your primary role up in Houston?
Yeah, so I'm the Science and Operations Officer, and I've been here a while. I've been in that role since late 2006. Primarily, responsible for getting sort of the latest research into operations, training forecasters, still do, a decent amount of forecasting. So I'm out on the desk still, maybe 25% of the time. So it's a pretty neat job. I get to do a little bit of a lot of things I like.
So something that always interests me, we have a SUE at Morristown that I talk to every once in a while. And so let's say in a situation like Harvey, is it all hands on deck? Is everyone forecasting, or do you have a primary role that you play during a major storm?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we have to divide up the management team because a lot of the times in those bigger events, we're the ones doing sort of our partner briefings, kind of with each advisory. So I took the night shift and was kind of the solo manager at night. And if you remember Harvey, we had a lot of fun at night. That's when a lot of the heaviest rain fell. So I did that for maybe, I guess, about 6 nights in a row, and they were usually 12-hour shifts, but I had a couple that extended to 14, 15 hours, but mainly doing a lot of the briefings, kind of supervising what's going out in the operations area. Pop up, I try to solve them.
Lots of coffee, I imagine.
Yeah, I drink more coffee than normal. I can definitely tell you that much.
For us here in Corpus, it was a little slightly different situation. Obviously, you'll probably hear Lance or I or both of us mention how this Harvey was really 2 different storms for our 2 areas. We had to put the hurricane shutters down. So we were all hands on deck. Plus, the region, our regional office in Fort Worth, had deployed 3 meteorologists and an extra electronics technician. So we had 24 people living in the office for 3 days, which creates a lot of its own unique challenges. But we worked 13-hour overlap shifts, split the office into 2 groups, and just went at it for 72 hours.
being hurricane offices, do you guys have any additional resources or equipment or anything to deal with these kind of threats?
Again, our office is totally different than the Houston office in terms of how we're located and what our facility's like. We really don't. We have a facility that's hardened more as such than inland offices are. We have a 500-gallon tank on our external building generator that powers the office for several days. But no, it's just, we ride it out.
All right.
Yeah, and here I think in the Houston office here, we're the only weather office that's co-located with emergency management here in Galveston County. So we are a true kind of emergency, response building. So we have bunks, although we usually don't use them because there's so many people here with other agencies using them, but we have a large kitchen. And so the county emergency management sort of takes care of some of the things that we would, a normal office would have to take care of on their own.
Okay, and we'll certainly revisit that because that's a interesting story, I'm sure, that kind of played out to your advantage almost during the height of the storm. But let's go back to before the storm. Let's kind of take this chronologically. With Harvey, it was really a storm that at one time was a weak little disturbance and wasn't really forecasted to be a huge threat. And then it got into the Gulf and we saw explosive development of the system. So talk to me a little bit about the rapid intensification of Harvey and how you guys saw that play out at your offices.
Yeah, for me, and Lance, you can fill in after I'm done. I'm sure you'll have something to add. But there was a personal side to this for me because I worked a long-term public forecast shift on the Sunday before Harvey, so I was responsible for that Friday Saturday period as part of my forecast. And yeah, at that point, we're looking at maybe some beneficial rains for the area, weaker system traveling to the south. There were some ensemble members that were hinting at maybe something being a little more like it was, but not great concern. I ended my shift at 3 o'clock and I got on a plane and I flew to Nashville, Tennessee for the eclipse. So that was pretty much what that week was going to be all about for me. And then on Monday, as we finished up the eclipse, I got a text from the office basically saying, might want to think about coming back. And the next day I was on a plane back to Corpus. And yeah, the rapid intensification was incredible. We really started seeing some possibilities of that on Tuesday, better trends for that on Wednesday. And then Thursday, it was just clear the thing was going to be a monster.
Yeah, we kind of, we knew we were probably going to be on the periphery of the landfall as far as impacts. So for us, it was kind of trying to figure out, it was in the early part of the week as well, like Tom was talking about. I specifically remember Tuesday being the day where I was fairly confident we were going to be in a tropical storm or hurricane watch on Wednesday. So I was, or at least by Thursday, but we weren't exactly sure of that timing, but we were doing preparations on Tuesday. And it's funny, at that point, the inland track was not clear at all. So we had really, when we were preparing for the landfall at first, we were kind of more worried about our southern areas that are adjacent to Tom's area there in Corpus. And so we really didn't transition to, hey, this is going to be a big deal for us after landfall until kind of midweek when some of the model runs started to show, hey, Harvey may slow down and drift. And then it was, which way is it going to drift? Is it going to go into the hill country and be San Antonio's problem? Is it going to go down to South Texas, or is it going to come this way? And we didn't get more confidence on that until kind of later in the week. So we had to switch gears a bunch as to what's actually going to happen to us.
And with Harvey, it was kind of the first major hurricane we had the opportunity to watch close to land with our new satellite GOES 16. Tom, especially, tell me about what those images were like just coming into your office and how you were able to utilize them. I know it was non-experimental operation, all that stuff, but still.
It was terrifying, to be honest. It was terrifying. We weren't sure until maybe 4 hours before that it wasn't going to take a little bit of a jog to the left and hit Corpus directly. But as it was moving inland, the satellite imagery, that perfect presentation of the eye, gave it, and all of the vortices in the eye too. And we want to revisit some of those later because that was fascinating. But we use that as a decision support tool to help with the emergency managers who were directing rescue and recovery operations in the eye of Harvey. So the satellite imagery, the radar imagery, and the relationship that some of the people here at the office have had with the partners there was able to do something I've really never heard of before. We're actually, coordinating rescues in an eye.
so they were going out and getting people, I assume probably in Rockport and Port Aransas and stuff during almost the calm of the storm.
Yep, when giving them down to the minute estimates on how much time they had, when to get people back in. The big hotel there in Fulton, where a lot of the storm chasers were, that facility basically was failing. People were rescued, moved to a stronger building from there, and they went out to multiple calls during the eye and had to rush back to the emergency operations center there in Rockport and just hunker back down. So yeah, all the imagery and the expertise of the forecasters here went a long way, I think, in there being no direct fatalities with the landfall.
That's simply incredible. I mean, we always hear about people venturing out during the eye, but it's something to think about. That's actually a potential rescue operation time frame.
Yep,
Scotty,
it was.
Yeah, Tom, you were just speaking about the storm chasers, and obviously, I guess the blue shed from Jeff Piotrowski kind of took over Harvey, for a little bit. But talk about the importance of those storm chasers. Were they relaying information to you guys? What was it like communication-wise with you guys and the storm chasers who were right there in the middle of it?
I don't remember any direct communication with them. We were monitoring streams as we could. Most of the reporting we were getting was through direct communication, either text or phone calls with emergency management folks as the eye came in. So we didn't have a lot of direct interaction with the storm chasers.
When an eye is hitting like that, what is the primary thing that's going on at the office? With hurricanes, a lot of times it's the lead up to the storm, the preparation, the forecast ahead of it. But right when the storm's making landfall, what's going on in an office?
Well, this was the first time we've had to issue an extreme wind warning, which is winds in excess of 150 miles an hour. We actually had to issue 3. The agency modified the extreme wind warning policy more or less on the fly because of Harvey, where the original thought on the extreme wind warning was it's a one-time issuance. You issue it, it's a hunker down warning, and you move on. The slow movement of Harvey and the expanse of its wind fields and how far inland those extreme winds went required us to issue it a second and then a third time to give that extreme wind heads up to folks further inland. So that was a lot of it. We're monitoring a lot of communications. We're answering a lot of phone calls, even as that eye is moving inland. Here in the office, we're dealing with structural issues and water coming into the office. So it was the fastest 18 hours of my life for sure.
And that was the amazing thing to me. You looked at Rockport and you looked at some of the cities right where the eye wall hit. I haven't seen Category 4 hurricane damage like that in a long time. Speak to a moment of the strongest wind gusts you guys saw and just some of the damage that was there along that eye wall.
It looked, we were out there within a couple days, and the pictures were staggering. We honestly, we kept waiting to hear about a mass casualty event, and thank God it didn't happen. It was a lot of EF2 and a fair amount of EF3 damage in the eye wall. There were areas of focus damage, we believe, with some of the vortices. We had one of the eye wall vortices. We measured 228 mile an hour winds just off the surface, with an estimate from the radar. Still waiting to see. There was a Doppler on wheels actually at the Rockport airport, and we cannot wait to get our hands on that data and see some of those smaller vortices. But it really showed for us the importance of construction quality, because homes that were newer and built to the newer code, which really, Category 4, those homes suffered some damage. The older homes that were not built to code, were gone. They were destroyed. So investing in better construction, in modern construction techniques, made it look like some areas were destroyed and some areas were hardly touched. That was as much about construction quality as anything.
That's incredible. Just like South Florida sometimes with Irma. Ashley, can you speak to a moment on those codes in Texas and what they require now?
Yeah, definitely. So really, it's really cool when we improve our codes and stuff like that. It's basically known in emergency management as mitigation. So when we're doing mitigation, basically we want to push people to build better houses to prevent damage. It's less costly after the disaster, things like that. I can't really use any direct examples on like any laws or anything that have been passed as of now, but I know every event, usually they'll go back in, they'll send engineers in and do case studies on what the damage was. And then usually, because it's on the minds of the government, local, state, national, they will pass new codes that they think that will help prevent that kind of damage in the future. So it's always very reassuring when we see mitigation being brought up. And that was a big thing in Harvey, especially in Houston right now. There are some really big mitigation projects that we think we're going to get a lot of grant money on, which is great because it's going to save us money later.
That's good news. This question posed for both Tom and Ashley. What were evacuations like? Were there evacuations along that where the eye wall was predicted to come ashore? And then how far inland did those go?
The mandatory evacuation orders were in Rockport, Fulton, basically Aransas County, San Patricio County, which includes the other side of the bay from Corpus Christi. Port Aransas, which is out on the island, was under a mandatory evacuation. There were several other communities up there, and those were followed closely. But we have every reason to believe the estimates are 30 to 40% of people rode the storm out. We've heard dozens of accounts of people riding the storm out on boats, people riding the storms out in mobile homes. Terrifying. They'll never do it again, but terrifying accounts. The city of Corpus Christi did not have a mandatory evacuation. They strongly recommended folks get out if they could. And in the end, as I mentioned, there was no direct loss of life. So certainly something to be said for decisions that were made.
Yeah, and I can also follow up. So I'm from Williamson County, and that's north of Austin. So our county wasn't looking at any kind of evacuations or anything like that. We were more prepared for coastal residents moving up, because usually people are going to be traveling north, more inland. So we have some plans in place where we can open up some shelters as a part of agreements that we have with coastal communities and things like that. So we were watching that for a while, and we were really unsure how many people were evacuating and how many people were leaving. So we thought there were going to be a lot more people. So we were really ramping up, preparing shelters and doing all of that. But the flow of people didn't seem to be as many as we thought. So I don't know what happened there, but I guess it's good because we were over prepared instead of under prepared. So
for sure. Shay, you wanted to bring something up about GOES 16 and kind of the lightning data that we saw when the eye wall was approaching.
Sure. So yeah, either Lance or Tom, whoever's more comfortable talking about this, if they thought it was a good talking point. We had something this year that we didn't before, which was the new GOES 16 satellite global lightning mapper, the GLM program with it. And it was actually able to capture some really interesting information about the storm. During rapid intensification, we saw it seemed like an unlimited amount of energy along the northern and northeastern banding of the storm. And I'll just screen share what I have, just a YouTube video here to everybody. Can everybody see it?
Yep.
You good? Okay.
Yep.
So I'll hit play, and this is on the 25th, 6 UTC, and it's going in. And you can just see the constant high energy banding around that side of the storm. I'm assuming a lot of this energy is because it's over the Gulf, but this was during the rapid intensification stage right here. And I wanted to kind of get your idea or maybe some thoughts or theories on why most of the convective energy was on this side of the storm and not pushing off to the north or the northwest quadrant.
I think just eyeballing it, that's, tropical systems making landfall in this part of Texas, the south quadrant, the west quadrant tends not to have nearly as much moisture with flow off the land. It just seems like that eastern quadrant is where that very strong convergence, deep moisture instability was really focused. With the real deep convection heading up into Houston and in this case, southern Louisiana. That would be one initial guess I would have. I don't know if you want to build on that, Lance.
Yeah, I know there's been some studies on hurricane intensification and lightning, and I think it's been a bit inconclusive. I do know that later on in Harvey's life, when we had the rain band, so Harvey's already well inland, and we had the rain band that produced all the flooding Saturday night into Houston, the 20+ inches. It had incredible, lightning activity. And I think what we might have been seeing there is it wasn't purely warm core any longer, that there's probably a mix of some cold core processes and warm core. So it definitely was a sign of instability. There's no doubt, especially that Saturday night where we got, pretty much hammered with the unbelievable rainfall rates. So there's going to be a lot studied there. I've talked to some of the sport lightning guys that are really looking at, this is new data. So we haven't seen lightning quite this way before, those real-time flashes like that, and you can kind of see the aerial extent visually. So it'll be interesting to see what they came up with. I think we have more questions than answers right now.
I think the lightning strikes around the eye wall at landfall were fascinating. I think there's a lot to learn there too. Like I said, this is new data, and it's not a data set we've had operationally in the past. So it's going to open up a whole new opportunity for science.
I just thought it was really impressive how fast that storm blew up there, and you know, kind of putting into factors like the sea surface temperatures of the Gulf at the time, the depth of those warm temperatures, and just the sheer energy and maybe the surface roughness or friction as it came onto land, and just all that energy bottled up there. I mean, and we haven't had a storm like that in quite some time. In fact, the Gulf's been relatively quiet overall for several years until this one came along. It kind of came across the Yucatan and just blew up, and it was forecast, which was good because it gave people some time. But the lightning mapper I thought was fascinating, just seeing that kind of energy along those sides of the storm.
We're lucky that Harvey ran out of water. Certainly not for Houston, it didn't run out of water, but it ran out of Gulf because it was strengthening right up to landfall. It was strengthening. So, you know, would it have reached Cat 5 with 12 more hours? Who knows? Glad we didn't have to find out.
Jared, you had a picture up earlier that this one really kind of took the cake as far as the eye wall running ashore, and I didn't know if you wanted to ask a question based with that or.
Yeah, no. Let me pull this back up real quick, just show everybody. So, I usually every time we have a weather service person on, they get very nervous about the fact that I have AWIPS for some reason, but I do have a public copy of AWIPS, and a kind soul who hosts a server, and so I was able to get I was able to get this. This is 30-second Ghost 16 imagery as the eye was crossing over, and you can kind of see some of the stations there, and then just some of them just start to disappear after a while. You know, how was this data? You know, I know preliminary, non-operational, unsafe, known to California to cause cancer, but you know, how was this used in operations?
You talking about Ghost 16 data in general, or this?
It's just like the 30-second 1-minute data.
I mean, like I said, it was we were looking at it continuously as we were briefing core partners in the eye wall. It was you know, we could see the mesovortices in the eye wall with the Ghost 16 data clearly. On the visible imagery before the sun set, there was, you know, clearly 4 distinct mesovortices in the eye wall, and then you could see those continue with the IR imagery as night fell. It was just a stark reminder to us how powerful this storm was, how much energy was involved with it. And it helped us, like I said, provide intelligence to our core partners there in the eye for them to do their job safely.
So let me get one last thought from you, Tom, on what Harvey will go down as being remembered for in your CWA.
In our CWA, it was a windstorm. There was surge. We had peak of 12.5 feet storm surge. A lot of storm surge damage on the backside of Rockport and on the backside of Port Aransas, but predominantly we're going to have wind damage with this storm. So it's going to be remembered as a 150-mile-an-hour wind gust hurricane.
Was that surge that happened once the eye passed and the wind switched direction?
No, it was driven locally by the winds.
Okay.
So this was not a storm like Ike that was a large storm that had a lot of time to build up. It was really local wind effects that drove primarily winds onto the west-facing sides of the bays there. A little bit of surge on the north side of the storm pushed up into the bays with a strong onshore flow, but most of those are relatively unpopulated areas. So most of the surge damage was to the south of the eye with a strong west offshore flow.
Gotcha. A lot of times, you know, we see surge in the bays or around the Outer Banks with the wind direction switching with the eyes coming ashore. So interesting stuff.
The water levels dropped along Rockport, actually, because the winds were blowing the water away from that side of the bay.
Gotcha. Well, let's transition just a little bit. Thanks for all your information down in your area. Really appreciate that. And let's head up to Houston and talk a little bit about what the storm was known for. And I think everyone almost has heard the story by now, you know, kind of the memories and the pictures of Harvey. But Lance, let's go back before the storm once again and talk about kind of the time leading up to it and these crazy, for lack of a better term, QPF forecast that came out predicting 50 inches of rain and the numbers that everyone kind of latched onto. Talk about just the thoughts in the office during that time. And then talk to me about the WPC excessive rainfall outlook that went high for the first time ever on day 3.
Yeah, so we were looking at all of that, and I think, as you remember, the QPF forecast basically, gradually ramped up. And it was a lot of rain even being forecast before landfall, and then the numbers kind of became staggering, especially when Harvey made landfall on that Friday evening. During the day on Fridays, we started forecasting isolated amounts around 40 or even potentially maybe a little higher in some areas. We were trying to we were asked a lot about our confidence. One of the things you run into with a forecast where maybe nobody's really ever seen before is you have to get them to believe it. So we struggled with that a little bit, because some people kept questioning us, you really think we're going to get this much rain, and we point to, well, most of our model guidance is in agreement of seeing these kind of really extreme amounts. So we would go back to talking about, models being in agreement, some record, I'm sure their record model forecast of QPF, we'll probably dig into that later. So we started coming up with words like, well, what are the impacts going to be with, say, 40 plus inches of rain? I remember thinking that, and we thought, well, catastrophic is a good way to describe what's going to happen. And then disastrous. I mean, we were really trying to grab what we call kind of mega descriptors to paint the picture in the briefings, because when you just say 30 or 40 inches, you just don't see that. And if you have seen it, it's only a few people ever. So we really tried to paint a picture of structure flooding, widespread flooding, and this was going to be a big footprint of flooding. A lot of times when you talk about maybe seeing that kind of rainfall, you're talking about very isolated areas, and we knew that was not going to be the case. We were looking at a widespread flood covering a huge metro area. We were fairly confident of that. So that was really our challenge, to get people to believe us, and then kind of believe the impact, so that they would understand that this is going to cause a lot of structure flooding, and we're trying to prevent loss of life. So that's kind of some of the things that were going on. As a meteorologist, we kind of checked with each other a lot. Are you seeing the same thing? Am I missing something? Because you hate to overdo it as well. But anyway, that's kind of what I remember going into kind of that Friday timeframe, where we really started ramping up the forecast. And we also coordinated everything with the Weather Prediction Center, and that was helpful, because you can kind of soundboard with conference calls with them too, where you can kind of bounce model guidance. What are you thinking about this model? Because the bullseye, who is going to get the most, was really important to us. And at first it kind of looked like it might be a little southwest of Houston, and that sort of transitioned northward during the event.
And Jared's got a tweet up here to kind of talk about one that was sent out. This one, I think, was the tweet that kind of caught everyone's attention. This event is unprecedented, and all impacts are unknown and beyond anything experienced. Talk about that.
Yeah, I forgot we used unprecedented as well. We used every word we could think of, but you're right. That was a good tweet. In fact, I will say, in this particular event, we manned a social media desk 24 hours a day, with just one person doing only social media. So I know we sent out more tweets than we've ever sent out in an event, and I think it was very helpful for getting our messaging out.
In terms of forecasting where that kind of band was going to set up, how did you guys go about doing that? What were the things you were looking for? What were some of the models you were using, I guess, or some of the data you were using?
So I thought that when you're kind of looking in the inside of, say, 18-hour time frame, the HUR was just, had some runs that really did well. And I remember working, I guess this would have been Friday night into Saturday morning. I started looking at the HUR forecasts that were getting out well into the evening hours of Saturday. And there was one particular HUR run, I want to say it was a 9 or 10 Z run, because before I went home, that advertised over 20 inches of rain and a band just to the west of Houston. And when I saw that, I knew we were in trouble. And that changed my whole mood. I believed it. I was looking at other models that were showing some banding that were going to set up. We knew Harvey was kind of drifting back towards us. So it all made sense. And I remember actually briefing the Galveston County judge, you know, ask him how many high water vehicles do you have? And he told me, and I said, you're going to need to get more. And I said, I'm actually, you know, I'm not sure. I know I have to work tonight. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with my family because I don't want them to have to deal with this flood and I'm not going to be there. You know, that crossed my mind Saturday morning, but I didn't know what to do with them because it was such a widespread event. So those are some of the things that kind of went through my head. And this was a good 12 hours, you know, before that rain ban really was disastrous.
And with those rain bans, what did you guys identify, or have you identified anything that made those bans just so intense?
Well, you know, we had unbelievable, you know, precipitable water values. I think it was around 3 inches or close to it, about as much as you can have. So we know from history, I mean, this isn't a whole lot different than what Allison did as far as rainfall rates, nocturnal rainfall rates. So we know the tropical systems, a lot of time you do see the worst rainfall at night. I think that has something to do with the boundary layer decoupling a little bit, and the inflow jet is more realized by the convection. It's more uninterrupted. You don't have any turbulence and that inflow getting into your system. So, and we knew Harvey was basically drifting. And I remember on some of the briefings, I kept telling people, when have you seen a nearly stationary tropical cyclone that's inland, you know, with this much moisture, still very organized? That's another thing to point out. Never really lost banding throughout the event. When have you not seen this be not really bad? I mean, it's just a matter of where. So we were on to that. We knew that. It was just the where, because like you said, it wasn't banding everywhere, and the bands would sometimes slow down and then move. So we were using all the high resolution model guidance we could get every run, looking at that, trying to pinpoint the bands and who was going to get impacted.
And so let's discuss for a moment just kind of the communication aspects. You mentioned earlier that emergency managers were in your building. So what were some of the things, and you mentioned already the high water vehicles, what were some of the things that they were asking you and you were telling them?
Well, one of the big ones was, when is it going to stop? Because, you know, the thing is you have lulls in these events. So we also tried to explain to people, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not a one-night event for us. So trying to get people to stay on guard, and emergency management in particular, is okay. You know, we had a lot of rain Friday night, and then there was a break during the day on Saturday for a lot of people. But we knew that we were going to have banding that night. So it was trying to make sure they realized, hey, this isn't over. So, you know, like I said, timing the different threats of when the heavy rain was coming back, that was something critical to try to forecast. And then they always want to know the amounts. You know, emergency managers are pretty savvy. They've worked events. They know in general what 8 to 10 inches does in their area. You know, they may not know what 40 inches does, but you know, if you tell them, hey, tonight you could see 10 or 20 inches of rain, you don't really need to say a whole lot more. They're going to go into, oh my goodness, that could be horrible if it sets over my county. So amounts are always critical. And like I said, Harvey was difficult because, you know, during the event, the amounts, you had to keep saying, well, how much more, you know, what's the additional rainfall going to be? And then they also want to know, what have we had in that area? So it was kind of a bookkeeping thing to try to keep communicating what's happened and what's going to happen, and for different areas. So we were also kind of working on that in our communication. So we sent a lot of information statements out, just summarizing what's happened in the last 24 or 48 or 72 hours, and then also showing, you know, what's still probably coming. So I've never worked an event where there were this many days of flooding potential in a row, and that was just flat out scary. It's hard to communicate. There's some unknowns in there because you get the breaks, and so yeah, I don't know what else to say other than that's a real challenge.
And this was a storm that got so much national media attention. Was your office involved in doing interviews? I mean, it's almost like something that's really come up in the last couple of years. These Skype interviews, all these FaceTime interviews and stuff. Is that additional workload put on the office?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we actually got less of that than we thought. And I think what happened was, you know, we had impacts even Friday night. And so once it starts raining and flooding, a lot of the attention goes to what's happening out in your community. And so that is kind of strange how that happened. We seem to get less requests for interviews, once those impacts showed up. So we did a little bit more of that on, say, ahead of the landfall than we actually did probably, as far as I remember. I was working nighttime, so I'm sure there was a little bit more in the daytime than I was dealing with, but it wasn't what you might expect. I remember during Ike, there were a lot of interviews and a lot of cameras in the operations area, and that really didn't happen during Harvey.
Working in the media, I mean, it's sad to say, but since it was the weekend, that may have actually limited it just a little bit. There's usually a little less staff in our offices on weekends.
Yeah, no doubt.
Your relationship with the local media there, though, I mean, obviously, KHOU had some major impacts. Other stations were having impacts. What was the relationship between the Weather Service and your broadcast partners?
So we've had a really good relationship with our broadcast partners, mainly because in the last several years we've been doing these meetings, what we call integrated warning team meetings. You're probably familiar with that. We had everybody participate in the media, and they're very active on chat. So that went really, really well. I think as far as I saw, that everybody was kind of with the same message. We didn't get a lot of people. Sometimes if you go out with an extreme forecast, you might get second guessed in the media. But as far as I know, that didn't really happen. And you have to remember that our global models did fairly well with that heavy rain and incredible QPF signal in them. So I think that's part of the reason why the meteorologists that are on air, they were generally on board with us from what I could tell, which is, it's tough to go on camera and tell people, those kind of rainfall amounts, and you hope you don't see it, but at the same time, you don't want to be wrong either, because that would be the ultimate cry wolf if it didn't happen.
Are there any stories, I guess, or big thoughts that come to mind from Harvey, things that really stuck out to you during the storm or after the storm?
Well, one thing that's really tragic is that 80% of the people in this area do not have flood insurance. So that's just a sobering fact. I think some of this will be addressed with some of the remapping of flood zones that's going to happen in this area. But this was our fourth unbelievable flood, really. I mean, this one really obviously affected a lot more people and was in a different category. But we had some Memorial Day flooding and the tax day flooding, where more people were obviously severely impacted and flooded as well. But to me, that's one thing that stands out and why it's so tragic. I mean, there's people that they're still trying to put their lives together. I mean, they can't get back in their home. Their home you may not be able to go back to, I know you can't go back to some of the homes. So it's a long recovery. And that's another thing that that's unfortunate, that's going to stick with us, is, just the incredible, I mean, setting the rainfall record for a tropical cyclone in the United States will always stick with me. The 60.58 inches that's over there was measured near Nederland, Texas, just east of us. I mean, that's there's just some numbers coming out of Harvey that I will never, ever forget. The amount of rain just falling in Harris County was estimated 1 trillion gallons could run Niagara Falls for 15 days. I mean, it's just hard to comprehend, really. So there's a lot that will stick with me, unfortunately.
And Tom, he mentioned people still displaced. We ran a story at my station, I guess about 2 or 3 weeks ago now, about Rockport and how a lot of people are still displaced. Is that the case in areas where the eyewall came ashore?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's going to be a year or more before that's, a lot of folks, Port Aransas, Rockport, tons of them living in hotels here around Corpus Christi. A lot of others have moved in with families. Some will never go back. So you should see the amount of debris. We went up there a few weeks ago, got some staff up there, and there's literally almost a mile-long section of the median of the big highway that runs up through Aransas County that's just debris. It's they got one humongous pile of wood and another humongous pile of stuff, and they're sorting through it all and burning it and mulching it and hauling it off. And there's that pile, and then there's 4 more piles just as big that are on the backside of the airport property. So just dealing with the mountains of waste and debris that used to be people's homes and all the trees, it's going to take a long time.
Mind-boggling in so many ways, the storm and in the aftermath. Let's talk real quick, Lance, about 100-year, 500-year, 1,000-year flood stuff and how that gets brought up every single time there's a flood. What's your perspective on that, I guess, or what would you classify Harvey if it even meets any of those criteria?
Yeah, that's a tough question. You're going to see a lot out there, different groups writing about that. I know Carrie Emanuel from MIT has already got a kind of a quick paper done trying to estimate those kind of things. You know, I think when you're dealing with trying to estimate, you know, return periods that are beyond where you've actually measured weather, there's a lot of uncertainty. So when you hear 500, or even heard more than that, heard people talk about, you know, this is biblical because this probably hasn't happened in 2,000 years. But the problem I have with some of that is it's just statistic. It's just kind of extending stats maybe a little, in my mind, a little further than you can do and really have a lot of faith in it. I don't know if that makes sense to you. So I put a lot more faith in a 100-year event right now than I would some of the longer term return periods. And then the other problem we have with even a 100-year event, you have to revisit it because things don't stay the same. And, you know, we know that climate is changing. Climate's always changing. So there's a lot to that. And I'm not really an expert in that. I would just say when I see those numbers, you know, I've read a lot about it because I want to understand it more. And the more and more I read, the more and more I just kind of scratch my head and say, wow, we really may not have a great handle on that. But it's important to try to get a good handle on that because that's what all your planning and your infrastructure for communities are planning for. You know, they want to design for the floods that they're going to see. And so it's important work. It's just it's difficult. And like I said, I'm still going to try to learn about that as much as I can.
Ashley and Lance too, if you want to add to it, now that we're after the storm, will we go back in and kind of revisit any of these flood maps or rezone properties and stuff? What will be the process in doing that?
Oh, definitely, especially in some of the areas where they didn't anticipate flooding. Maybe they thought that they were safe, but they were not due to, like you guys said, unprecedented storm. So now that we have the results of what some of these greater rain-making storms can do, we're probably going to send FEMA surveyors and other surveyors to redo those maps once again, take a look at the plains, take a look at the rules, because different communities have different laws and rules and zoning for where you're allowed to build. So they're going to reassess all of that kind of thing. Me personally, with the whole 100-year, 500-year thing, I don't like the terminology because it's very confusing to the public. A lot of people literally think, oh, well, if it floods, you know, this one time, then it's not going to happen again 100 years. No, it's your 1% chance a year of that flood. So I think when we're talking about this kind of flooding and getting outreach to the public, we need to change the terminology with that. So maybe people will kind of understand a little better the risk for the flooding that they have.
I think there's a misconception too that, and I was at a meeting recently, it was in New Orleans, and you know, someone half jokingly said, the way that if you live in the state of Louisiana, the way that you know you need flood insurance is if the letters L and A are on your driver's license. So of course, everybody has L and A on their driver's license. So I think you see something similar where folks feel like, hey, I'm outside the 100-year floodplain. I'm not required to have flood insurance. We see that all the time here in Corpus Christi. They feel like they're safe. And then an event of a much longer recurrence period comes along that's catastrophic or biblical, and they feel like, you know, how could they have known? So that's one of the dangers we see, is tying things into that 100-year when, you know, the reality is we're getting these that are catastrophic.
Yeah, I mean, we had a 1,000-year storm here. They called it in Charleston, South Carolina, 2015 in October, the one that nobody will forget. But you know, 1,000 years. I mean, that's just like Ashley said, very confusing. I mean, now there's an Eastern Seaboard Coalition of all the coastal states with the state DHEC sort of launched mycoast.org, and they're sort of going for coastal resiliency and trying to finite their laws and trying to figure out where the most damages are being done for coastal resiliency, like I said. And that's what the East Coast is doing on our side. I don't know about the Gulf or what the efforts are there, but you know, this is becoming a reality. Today's floods are tomorrow's norms. That's the saying.
Yeah, good point. Everybody made a great point there. I like, Ashley's point about saying, using the 1% rather than, every year. That's definitely a better way to term a 100-year flood, I think, for the public. And I know NOAA is about to update the flood, the recurrence intervals here. They've got a preliminary document here for Texas that'll become final later on, and they are considering what's been happening here recently. So there will be some changes. And when you're talking about changes where there's 6.5 million people, that could be significant for building and zoning and design. So it'll be interesting, to see what happens in that arena going forward. Like, what are the changes being made to handle flooding in Houston?
I've got one more question. This one's for Tom. This is as the storm was making landfall, and I just want to ask how you thought the data in that area was doing. Now, this is going to be pulled from our data scope, which you're familiar with weather flow from some of our mesonet, our coastal mesonet, and some of this data blipped out a little bit early on during the storm. This is Port Aransas, this is Aransas Pass that I'm showing right here. And you see the data just kind of clip out about 5:30, 5:33. That was it. You had 61 knot winds and then in gusts, and that was it for that station. Then not too far over to the east was Port Aransas, and that one blipped out a little bit later, about 10 and 10 or 10:15. And so there was no more data there, but you had enough data to say, wow, look at the pressure go from 12:48 a.m. at 1,008 millibars down to 959 millibars by 9 p.m. That is significant drop in pressure. And actually, you can see where the eye wall is there as the winds are dropping down. But once this data is gone, you lose those points of reference. So how do you feel that the data how do you feel the data did for you in that area as the storm made landfall?
It was a mixed bag. The ASOS systems, the Weather Services observing equipment at Corpus Christi, at Victoria, at Rockport, all went down very early in the storm, right around 60 or 65 knots. Commercial power was lost, and they just were gone. So that's a concern, and that's something we certainly have seen that before. We noticed it with Irma, and it happened with Maria. Those aviation, the airport systems just go down. But other NOAA-owned sensors, the former TCON, the Texas Coastal Observing Network, now owned by the National Ocean Service and co-ops, those stations stayed up, including the one there at Port Aransas at the jetty and multiple other stations up along the waterways. That was the data we knew. The highest wind gust we were aware of real time was at the jetty there at Port Aransas, 132 miles an hour. So we had that data real time, and that was critical. And of course, we were looking at the weather flow data too. We had enough data that we could give our partners that were involved with the situation good information about what was coming in the eye wall. But a lot of the systems on the extremities of the storm went down and were down for days.
Understood. All right. Thank you very much. I'll pass that on to Eric. I think Eric had a question for you.
Yeah, good evening, guys. So I know specifically with Tom, I know you've had a good amount of experience in the past with your time in Nashville of being able to use social media to get inbound reports of what's going on. And I just wanted to ask both of you about how that played a role in this, as far as, getting those reports from people, what they were seeing, pictures of what they were experiencing, and maybe even, was there some of that use also from an emergency management perspective, as far as, pleas for help and so forth? How did social media play a role in this?
In our much like Lance said earlier, we staffed a social media person that did both English and Spanish social media through the event. So that was something that we were very happy we were able to do. We doubled our Twitter followers through the event, which was a lot for us. But in real time, I think most folks here were in a hunker down mentality. This wasn't the kind of system you really report on or spot. Most folks were just inside, hunkered down. In the eye wall, people had either evacuated or they were in their safest place they could get. So the information we got was a little sketchy, really, in real time. It wasn't like a tornado outbreak or big severe thunderstorm where you're getting real time spotter reports and information coming in through your various social media feeds. It was, I won't say radio silence, but there was a lot of periods there where we weren't getting a lot of information and just kind of had to guess how bad it was.
Lance, one last question regarding tornadoes, because that was a huge thing that we saw during the storm in Houston. Talk to me about all the tornado warnings that were issued and how you guys kind of went about issuing those.
Yeah, so tornado watch continuously for 4 days. So I think that's got to be a record. You know, it'd be interesting to find out. I'm pretty sure it has to be. And so we did.
But it's not even close.
So that's that creates a little bit of fatigue for your warning people, and so we had to switch some people in and out on that. There were just so many rain bands coming on shore that had cells within them that were rotating. There was a lot to watch, and it was, like I said, it was fairly constant. It led to 157 tornado warnings from Friday morning through Monday evening. And we've confirmed, I think it's in the upper 20s as far as the number of tornadoes that we actually saw. And we saw, you know, we even had, I believe we had one EF2 tornado. So they weren't all just, you know, EF0s either. So it was an interesting event, and we're still studying that. What we're actually doing right now is we're going back and trying to document every couplet and warning to try to, you know, just to go back and see, you know, where all of these, you know, which ones were actually tied to tornadoes that we know of, you know, what were the actual signatures, you know, actually getting the numbers, you know, the gate-to-gate numbers, what they look like in the vertical. Because one thing you run into when you're looking at multiple circulations that may only live for 10 or 15 minutes is you're just constantly going to the next one. And that was challenging. So, I mean, I think we'll learn a lot more as we go through. It takes a lot of time. We have a couple of forecasters working on that. But we really want to learn from it. We want to learn, hey, is there a way we could have gotten that false alarm rate down a little bit? Because do we really have to warn for, you know, put out that many warnings for that many confirmed tornadoes? And it may turn out that, yes, we, you know, to get them all warned for, that's pretty much what you had to do. So that'll be interesting to me to see what we come up with.
And I've heard that there is going to be a service assessment on Harvey. Is that something that'll be looked at, I imagine, during that process?
Yeah, they've already, you know, come and visited both offices. We did talk about tornadoes. I think their main emphasis will be the flooding because of all the, you know, we had, unfortunately, a significant number of people lose their lives. So we're going to, I'm sure it'll be somewhat from a, probably look at the flood messaging as much as anything. Is, you know, is there ways that we can do anything better there? But yeah, I think everything is fair game, and we want to always improve. So I hope, you know, I hope that not only us, our own agency, but we have some academic partners that will study Harvey's tornadoes in particular.
All right. Anything else you guys, you know, want to bring up or you think is important to talk about with Harvey? We're getting close to the end here, and I want to kind of wrap our conversation up. I want to give you both just a moment to tell us anything else you wanted to mention about the storm.
I think for us, it was an awakening for the whole area. We've been since 1961. The Texas had a Cat 4. It was the first major to hit the Corpus area since 1970. So we'd gone a long time here without a significant direct hit from a hurricane. But you look back historically, back into the 1800s, and there's been periods of 2 or 3 major hurricanes hitting the coast in 10-year periods along the Texas coast. So I'm not prognosticating that's what we're going to get into, but I think it's something for people here to realize is in active periods, these things can be a way of life. They can be almost normal, where they're happening every few years, and we got it out of the way. We're good for a while now, because I'm hearing a little of that. So we got to keep people on guard. Next season could be as bad or worse.
Yeah, I think you know, that's always preparedness is our focus. And so one thing that, you know, I have actually been out in the community saying this before, but I'm going to emphasize it even more, that, you know, how important I think flood insurance is. That's one thing that I'm going to keep messaging. We have a team that looks at flash flood messaging. You know, we have both emergency management and media partners. So we're going to continue to look at ways that we message, calls to action. Harvey was really interesting from the messaging standpoint because we had areas under a tornado warning where people were also being told to go to their roof because of flooding. So we need to sort of think about when you have these floods and tornadoes, what is your message? I mean, obviously that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So there's a lot of things we can look at, I think, from the messaging standpoint with Harvey, and we'll be studying it again, multi-agency, multi-partner. How can we be more effective? I know we saved a lot of lives just by sort of being ready for it as we could have been. So I know, Houston and Harris County, they were ready for that night. They were as ready as they could be, and they had personnel ready to block off roads and things like that. So TxDOT was ready as they could be. But still, we have people losing their lives, so we need to figure out, is there anything else we can do, to reduce that?
Sure. Well, I think in closing, just thank you guys all for both your offices, all the work you guys put in for the storm and for, during, and after. We really appreciate it. And watching from afar, I can't imagine what it was like in the offices, but I can tell you that the messages seem to have gotten out, and we really appreciate all of your efforts during it. So, Scotty, with that, we'll give it back to you, and we'll talk about the next storm, which is our slight chance of a flurry or something like that in North Carolina, right?
Very, very so. I do want to say, Lance, if you and Tom want to give out your social medias for the weather offices, or how maybe our followers can keep up with the progress that's going on in Houston or in Corpus Christi, I'll give you the opportunity to do that right now. And
we're at NWS Corpus.
All right.
Yeah, and we're at NWS Houston, so that's pretty easy.
All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. I know both of you have had a long day, so we'll let you guys get on. But thank you for your hard work, like Ricky said, and Merry Christmas to you guys. And hopefully you can get some time with your family and some rest down there.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, guys. Thank you so much. Yeah, Ricky, as you were talking about winter weather, I guess we're going to jump into that a little foray here in the next 48 hours or so. I guess your area and my area here in Western North Carolina have it, but Eric, I don't know about you. Do you guys expect anything from this this cold air Arctic plunge before it gets here in the southeast?
Good Lord, I hope not.
But everything comes to Memphis, I heard.
No, we were actually there was a little bit of a chance for Friday, Saturday, a couple of days ago. I think the Weather Service even put a 20% chance of a snow shower in, but it looks like we're going to get right on the border of that ridge to the west and the big trough to the east, and so the short waves that are rotating around that low are going to stay to our north and east, and we should be able to avoid it. It's just going to be cold and dry here.
Yeah, I thought that, but I just want to make sure. Ricky, with you and I guess dealing with it the most, Shay, you and Jared are actually helping in the assistance because that cold front has really stalled out in your neck of the woods. And it looks like, Shay, maybe you can talk a little bit about this. I know you've been posting some. We're going to see several low pressure systems develop on it and kind of right up the front off the coast.
Yeah, we'll see some Gulf moisture wrapping up. Jared, you may be a little bit more plugged into the local weather here. But from what I've been watching over the last few days is this front just sort of stalling out over us. We had a pretty mild day today, actually. It was fairly warm, the last one for a while here. Once this front makes its way through and these northerly winds bite down over the area, it's going to get cool for quite some time. But yeah, lots of Gulf moisture pumping up along that front. So we'll get low pressures developing right off the coast. Sometimes they form in the Gulf, they transfer right over into the Atlantic, and then they develop off the coastline, which can add sort of a wraparound moisture feature with cold air diving in behind it. Depends on what level that cold air comes down. A lot of times you get a warm nose into the coastline where that low pressure is wrapping a warm layer into the coast, and then you end up just with cold rain or maybe sleet or freezing rain along areas more eastern North Carolina. But I don't think there's a big chance for snow. Maybe upstate South Carolina, I think some flurries are in the forecast, but we may have a chance for some of that in South Carolina. And Jared, I don't know if you've heard anything else about South Carolina, but I know North Carolina is bracing for some sort of wintry precipitation coming up that could be blended in with this, at least for central to portions of the Piedmont, and then maybe turning over to snow in the upstate.
Yeah, it's interesting, Shay, that you're talking about that. The models today have really kind of hit on a more northwest jog, which they tend to do a couple of days out before a system affects you. I know the NAM, I know the latest NAM is going out right now, but I know the NAM was kind of bullish in its figures. The GFS and both the European are both showing some precipitation over North Carolina, anywhere between Raleigh, Greensboro, Charlotte, Hickory, back into Asheville. Kind of a rain snow mix, but the problem is our ground temperatures are still in the upper 40s, so anything that does fall, it's going to have a hard time sticking. It's going to have to be pretty heavy for it to fall and stick. And then also the cold air, we have it aloft, but not really at the surface. The high pressure, not the ideal location for big snow in North Carolina, but still enough. I think Friday evening into early Saturday morning, the chances of seeing some snowflakes fall will be pretty good. And, if a few areas can get snow hard enough at times that temperatures are at or around freezing, we may see a little bit of accumulation on grassy surfaces. But I don't foresee any road problems, anything like that. More of a novelty, more of a thing of saying, hey, it snowed before Christmas in the Southeast, and you normally don't see that. But Ricky, you guys dealing with this, but you're also going to be dealing with some northwest flow up there in East Tennessee and the North Carolina mountains.
Yeah, you were talking about the snow there in North Carolina, and I think we may have the same situation to a degree. Although we have some cooler temperatures today. It was too cold for me. Temperatures today only reached up like in the 30s. But I think North Carolina, Scott, it's been one of those setups where you get that heavy burst of snow, it covers everything, and then literally an hour later, there's not even a trace of it left. For us in Western North Carolina, the mountains of North Carolina and East Tennessee, the Friday situation is interesting because it really depends on how far west the moisture gets. We've seen setups like this before where a lot of the moisture looks like it's going to be east of the mountains, and then kind of in the days leading up to it, it trends west a little bit. And that's what we've been noticing to a degree. We're really going to be on that peripheral edge of any moisture. But I wouldn't be shocked, honestly, to get some snowflakes in the North Carolina or Tennessee mountains Friday. And then we go into Saturday, and you mentioned another cold spell and a little clipper system coming down. With that one, it's interesting because it's going to be a little bit dependent on the track. Some models been wanting the moisture to go a little further north, some a little further south, some straight through my heart of my DMA, which is Southwest Virginia, Northeast Tennessee. So I'm more confident in Saturday, I guess, than I am on Friday. I could see a light accumulation even in the valleys of Tennessee. Mountains, with northwest flow snow and temperatures that are dropping down into the 30s and 20s at night, you're going to have some pretty good snowmaking for the ski slopes and just natural northwest flow snow off the Great Lakes. They could pick up, especially towards the peaks of the mountains, a couple inches, if not maybe close to winter storm warning criteria in a few places. Probably more on the North Carolina side, I imagine the Tennessee side. But, Roan Mountain, White Top, Virginia, parts of Grayson County, some eastern Wythe County areas, then into Unicoi, portions of Carter, Johnston counties. It wouldn't shock me to see maybe an inch or two of snow, especially when you get above 3,500, 4,000 feet. It just depends on how much moisture it is and how scattered the snow showers are. Unfortunately, this isn't a huge band of moisture moving towards us. It's kind of going to be scattered snow showers. But northwest flow is an incredible thing to me. It always seems to find a way to get things done. So I'm sure we'll be talking about snow as we go into Saturday night and Sunday morning across my area.
It does, Ricky. And Shay, I know you had that product pulled up. Could you, I'm sorry, I know you just took it down, but
yeah, sure, no problem.
You can pop it back up.
Yep.
This is the weather.
Saturday morning right here. You want me to back it up? I can just kind of.
Yeah, Saturday morning's fine. This is the Weather Predictions Center. This is kind of their probabilities of snow. And Shay, if you could zoom in more into the North and South Carolina area, that'll kind of give you some of the areas. I think it's Greensboro back towards Asheville, Hickory, maybe the I-40 corridor per se is like 50 to 60% chance of at least 1 inch of snow. And then that little map, you can do 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on inches of snow. But that with an inch of snow, that's a pretty good 50 to 60% chance for Western North Carolina. So like Ricky said, if it gets snow hard enough, it will accumulate, but it also melt away pretty quickly too with the warm ground temperatures. What I've been telling people, and there's not really a storm in the offering, but this pattern, I'd love for all of you guys to jump in on this. This pattern really sets up or really says, hey, we could see a winter storm somewhere develop in the southeast. with the polar jet, polar vortex ejecting a little lobe of energy down here. So the cold temperatures will be here after this weekend, and an active storm track. I wouldn't be surprised next week or the week after that storm chances go up or continue to stay elevated as we enter this stormy pattern.
Yeah, I'm a little bit surprised to see Atlanta and some of these areas of Georgia also have a higher percentage rate. I mean, that typically you see Atlanta, they get some of this ascension, they get some of that Gulf moisture and that cold mixture dropping off the end of the Appalachian Mountains over that area, and so that tends to happen. Then we see the chances expanding all the way over to New Orleans and then parts of Texas too a little bit earlier on for Friday, I believe. So you can see that string of percentage of wintry precipitation or probability a little bit on the light side as far as when you go further south, but along the backside of that stalled cold front, you can kind of see the trend there. So whatever drops down from the north, any of those little short waves of low pressure that drop down will add to it. Just depends on how much energy there is. And a lot of times that frozen column is a northwesterly sort of drifting down along the bottom end of that jet stream dip higher up. So we'll see what happens. It should be pretty interesting. But either way, this is going to be around for a long time. This cold air mass will be around in the southeast for a while. Next couple of weeks for the unforeseeable future. Really may have a few fluctuations in highs for the days, but the lows at night are going to be pretty chilly for most folks down here.
I agree. And Miss Ashley, you guys also had flurries in your forecast, right?
Sure did. So we were really happy with this system because we've really had about 3 weeks of just sun, dry conditions. As an emergency manager, I'm really concerned about La Nina for Texas because that means little rainfall, very warm. We're concerned about wildfires, especially going into the spring next year. So just getting this system to come through, and we got rain all day today. I think we're projected to get about 2 inches of rain, which is helpful. And then our low temperatures tonight, we're not going to hit freezing tonight, but we're going to get into the 30s. And there's a chance for just some flurries a little bit in my county. Nothing serious at all. And our grounds are, like you guys said, way too warm from the past heat wave for anything to go on. So we're kind of excited just to see the winter precipitation. And I had to talk down some people, especially like our road and bridge and stuff, because when you start throwing winter out there, they freak out and want to go get the salt trucks. But we're going to be okay. So maybe we'll get to see a couple flurries here and there. But we're just excited for the precipitation.
Again, and like you said, right now, our thoughts are and prayers with the folks of California. Seeing all the pictures coming out of California right now is it's crazy. We had our fire season last year in the Southeast, but goodness, some of the pictures out of it, Los Angeles is just astounding. I mean, that's crazy.
Yep. And with, Harvey and all the rainfall in Texas, and then we're kind of drying up, all that rainfall brought a lot of fuel, which is now going to dry up. So if we are going to trend on the drier side to the spring, we're probably going to expect quite an active wildfire season. So we're hoping to take precautions now and maybe take care of some of that fuel. But I've been constantly hammering home the fact that we're going to be more at risk of that. So it's something to look out for in the next upcoming months. Definitely.
And we're going to be talking about forest fires in January. We're going to be talking about how forecast for those. So we'll transition to kind of closing the show out tonight. Next week, Miss Ashley is our guest. She's been our panelist the past couple of weeks, but next week we're going to really get in depth and learn about what Ashley does. She works in Texas with emergency management. And Ashley, you've done a lot of research on tornadoes and things like that. So we're looking forward to talking with you for the entire hour next week.
Yeah, I'm totally really excited to be here and be able to talk about how I'm kind of learning how to integrate weather and meteorology and science into emergency management, how we can mesh those two and kind of work together through multidisciplinary background that I have. So I can't wait for next week.
Well, we're looking forward to it as well. And after Ashley's show, we're going to have Dr. Marshall Shepard on with us on the 20th, I think that is. And that'll be our conclusion for the 2017 season of the Carolina Weather Group. And we'll take the next week off and enjoy the holidays with our families. And then we'll go back at it strong in January. So for everyone here in the Carolinas, we hope that you have a nice, safe afternoon and evening and enjoy the snow flurries this weekend. And until then, stay warm. And we'll see you next Wednesday night here on the Carolina Weather Group.